The guy behind Led Zeppelin's iconic Golden Man and soaring voice had scars that most fans were unaware of. There have been victories along the way for Robert Plant: car accidents, heartbreak, death, and personal issues that almost silenced him forever. However, also influenced it. Tragedy followed him everywhere, even while he was at the pinnacle of his career. Plant is still regarded as one of rock's most recognizable characters, decades later. After everything he has through, however, the question still remains: where did the journey ultimately take him in 2025? On August 20, 1948, Robert Plant was born in the Black Country, a harsh industrial region of England close to Birmingham, that is notorious for its smoky sky and dirty air. Despite the fact that the area was still damaged by World War II bombings in the early 1950s, Plant recalled a joyful upbringing. His mother, Annie Celia Plant, who brought excitement and vitality into their family, was largely responsible for that. She loved to dance and sing, and her kid inherited her lively personality. Although he had previously played the violin, his father, Robert, put aside his love to support the family. He was a disciplined and orderly civil engineer who had been in the Royal Air Force during the war. He inherited his passion for cycling and his enduring devotion to the Wolverhampton Wanderers. However, he was unable to comprehend his son's passion with music. Singing wasn't a career to him. It wasn't a job at all. He desired for his son to choose a more stable career route, such as accounting. Annie had a distinct influence. Robert accepted the fact that she was partially Romani. He was influenced by her free personality, inventiveness, and wild curls. She had thick hair that was tough to brush through, he would remember later. A minor element that seems to represent the greater wildness of her nature. Robert was already singing into his hairbrush while posing as Elvis by the time he was 9 years old. He first experienced the stage as a youth when his father would take him to the Seven Stars, a small blues bar in Sturbridge. He began singing with the Delta Blues Band, a house group, to get a taste of performing live. At the age of 15, he almost accidentally ended up on stage in 1963. Though he never dared to sing, he frequently hung around with his friend's band, the Jurymen, helping them carry their gear. The band asked Robert to fill in for their singer one night, when she became ill prior to a performance at the Bull's Head pub in Lye. He seized the microphone despite his nervousness. Who relates the narrative determines the memory of that night. Plant recalled the experience as nerve-wracking, stating that he was unable to even look at the crowd until the songs were finished. For those in attendance, such as drummer John Dudley, however, it was a different matter. One of the teenagers they saw exuded confidence. His loud voice occupied the entire space and attracted everyone's attention. The audience saw simply unadulterated talent, regardless of his inner feelings. Plant's experience with local bands began that night, and he quickly found himself in high demand. However, music and school did not get along. He became less interested in classes the more he played. His parents became concerned, particularly after he joined the blues group Crawling King Snakes, which made his goals more apparent than before. His teachers became weary of his absences. His grades declined, and domestic tensions increased. In the end, he was expelled, even though he barely passed his tests. Robert Plant made the decision to leave home and pursue music full-time at the age of 17. He took odd jobs, worked in construction, laid pavement, and even worked at Woolworths for a spell to support himself while pursuing his ambition. He was bouncing between bands and cutting oddball singles with CBS Records at the same time. He met drummer John Bonham during this time, and their relationship would influence all that came after. Both musically and personally, the two clicked right away. They also formed the Band of Joy in 1966, fusing the psychedelic sounds that were popular in the late 1960s with gritty blues. At the age of 18, Plant was already attempting to make a name for himself. By the summer of 1967, he was making progress with Band of Joy and had released a solo single titled Our Song. But there was also an unexpected setback that summer. Plant pulled onto a busy road while driving his ancient Ford van through West Bromwich, collided with a tree, and clipped another vehicle. He was charged with driving without necessary care and attention, even though the collision wasn't serious. After Johnny entered a not guilty plea, Mike Dolan, his manager at the time, saw a chance to use the hearing as a publicity gimmick for the band. Plant leaned into the spectacle as he entered the courtroom. He anticipated a throng, decked out in hippie attire, an Indian bridegroom chess piece, and what the Liverpool Daily Post described as an Oriental costume. Rather, just 7 bandmates and friends attended. "Don't plant it, smoke it," and "Robert Plant must go free" were among the signs held by self-styled flower kids. Although the judge ultimately dismissed the case due to insufficient evidence, it received a mixed response. The story was carried by newspapers in London, Birmingham, and Liverpool, among other places in England. However, the majority only mentioned Plant as a pop artist, never bringing up Band of Joy. There was ramifications from the publicity as well. Dorrit Thompson, a young nursing student, lost her job after being seen supporting Plant at the rally. The noise had little effect on the band itself. Although the Band of Joy had disbanded by the spring of 1968, Plant and Bonham remained friends, and they would soon join guitarist Jimmy Page and bassist John Paul Jones. Led Zeppelin, one of the most renowned rock bands in history, was formed by that combination. Plant was just out of his teens when Zeppelin went on tour for the first time in 1968, and the unexpected surge of recognition was a shock to him. He received particularly scathing criticism from critics, who frequently made fun of his appearance and voice manner. John Landau of the Rolling Stones called him prissy, while another critic derided him as little more than a copy of rock star sexuality. The remarks caused Plant, who was already insecure, to become so nervous that manager Peter Grant frequently protected him from unfavorable critiques in order to get him on stage. He brought that self-doubt into his band role. Jimmy Page even viewed Plant as the weak link, since he was hesitant to create songs. His name didn't appear on their debut record, and he was once paid less than Richard Cole, the group's tour manager. Part of the reason was contractual. Plant couldn't legally write for Atlantic Records without breaking his contract, because he was bound by CBS Records from a previous band, Listen. Furthermore, Led Zeppelin got into trouble later, since a lot of the lyrics on their debut were lifted from classic blues tunes. Page said that Plant frequently left the original lyrics in place even while he meticulously changed the music, making them prime targets for legal action. However, Led Zeppelin's performances became bigger, noisier, and far more chaotic as their fame skyrocketed. No one in the band could have foreseen the troubles that followed that pandemonium. The Vigorelli Stadium in Milan, Italy, hosted one of the most outrageous instances on July 5, 1971. The venue was filled with about 15,000 spectators, and the atmosphere quickly became dangerous. As fire started in the stands, the promoters pleaded with the band to quiet the crowd. According to Stephen Davis's book Hammer of the Gods, Robert Plant repeatedly pleaded with the audience to halt, but to no avail. Hundreds of riot police quickly arrived brandishing batons, water cannons, and tear gas. Then there was panic. The audience hurried over to the stage. The band had to abandon their instruments and flee for their lives as smoke filled the air. One of their roadies was hit in the head by a broken bottle during the confusion and was taken to the hospital immediately. Later, Jimmy Page called the situation chaos and said it left him very shocked. But on stage, Plant was the epitome of what a rock frontman should be. He became the epitome of a rock god with his untamed energy, half-unbuttoned clothes, and wild blonde hair. He was constantly moving, applauding, dancing, and letting his body move to the music. This high-octane version of him was even given the band's nickname, Percy. His charismatic presence contributed to the definition of what it meant to be a rock frontman. In Rock Scene magazine, fans even mocked his charm by voting him Chest-O-Rama. Plant dismissed it with a laugh, acknowledging that he was at a loss for words when it came to receiving a prize for his chest. However, there was a high cost associated with being a frontman. That degree of singing was extremely taxing on the body, particularly the vocal cords. Robert Plant was not an exception to the rule that many vocalists eventually require surgery to fix damage. Fans pointed to a distinct change in his voice around 1972 or 1973, and the New York Post reported that he had vocal cord surgery, though the exact time is unknown. Many were persuaded that the surgery made him more cautious about protecting his voice, because his subsequent performances tended to be more subdued than the wild screaming of his early years. The hazard increased with the size of Zeppelin. Not only did fame bring admiration, but it also attracted unsettling attention. Jimmy Page faced criticism and even death threats as a result of his interest in the occult and Aleister Crowley. These threats grew commonplace throughout the 1973 U.S. tour, according to their publicist Danny Goldberg. John Paul Jones thought about quitting the band due of them at one point. According to biographer Mick Wall, disturbed devotees, such as Lynn Squeaky, a loyal Charles Manson supporter, hounded Page herself. When police learned that another man felt Page was destined to die and wanted to take action, they detained him. The band had to travel under strict security as a result, bodyguards in their entourage, some of whom were former FBI agents, watched the group all day and all night, while Page, who suffered from insomnia, maintained his own security by constantly posting outside his door. Manager Peter Grant placed guards at hotel elevators. Zeppelin was unable to avoid problems even with that degree of security. On the last night of their American tour, July 29, 1973, catastrophe happened. When tour manager Richard Cole entered the band's safety deposit box at the Drake Hotel in New York, prior to their final performance at Madison Square Garden, he discovered it was empty. The tour's profits of more than $200,000 had disappeared. Cole later recalled how shocked he was to discover only passports inside. Knowing what it meant, he let out a scream. The timing couldn't have been worse, yet the FBI was summoned right away. Agents searched the band's hotel rooms during their final performance. The robber had a key because the safe hadn't been forced open. Their inner circle was suspected. Cole even took and passed a lie detector exam, but no suspect was ever found. Decades after the theft garnered national attention, the case is still unresolved. However, according to historian Bob Spitz, a number of band members thought Peter Grant was the one who planned the crime. Led Zeppelin was at the height of their popularity by 1975. Surprisingly, all of their earlier albums returned to the charts, and their most recent album, Physical Graffiti, had just been released to critical acclaim. They were on a major tour that was taking over North America, and they even sold out London's Earls Court Arena, which at the time was the largest stadium in Britain, 5 nights in a row. The band appeared to be unstoppable, but that summer everything changed. Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and their families took a trip to the Greek island of Rhodes. As a brief respite from the road, August 4th was a tragic day. Maureen, Robert's wife, lost control of a rental automobile while traveling down a mountain route. The vehicle crashed into a tree after toppling down the cliffside. Robert and Maureen were inside, together with Jimmy Page's little daughter Scarlett and their kids Carmen and Carrick. It was a horrific accident. Both kids had shattered bones. Maureen was flung against Robert's body, breaking his elbow and leg. Robert originally believed Maureen had died because of the severity of her injuries. She required a blood transfusion and had fractures to her skull and pelvis. They were stuck in a distant location, which made things worse. A local farmer was their only savior, driving the stricken family in the back of his fruit truck to the hospital. The path to recovery was lengthy, but everyone made it out alive. A cast was placed on Robert's leg, extending from his hip to his toes. He used a wheelchair for 6 months and a cane for another year. A calmer, more somber attitude had taken the place of the joyous spirit that had always characterized him. In addition to severely incapacitating him, the collision compelled Led Zeppelin to postpone the remainder of their tour. Plant persisted in his musical endeavors in spite of his injuries. He used crutches to prop himself up during the band's recording of Presence, their 7th studio album. The recording process was exhausting. He once crashed to the ground after his crutch caught on a cable. Normally quiet, Jimmy Page ran across the room to assist him up, a moment Plant would later remember with a mix of appreciation and laughter. Once his ankle was deemed unharmed, he wheeled himself back into the studio, recorded Achilles' Last Stand's soaring vocals, and rolled out again. Led Zeppelin had taken back their hegemony by 1977. They were in the middle of a hugely successful U.S. tour, and 7 of their albums were at the top of the charts. However, on July 26th, everything fell apart in New Orleans. Robert had just arrived in the city when Maureen called him in a panic. Carrick, their small son, had a sudden infection that made him very sick. Another call arrived 2 hours later. Carrick had passed away while en route to the medical facility. Robert was devastated by the news. He went home to mourn after the remainder of the tour was abruptly canceled. Robert's own father characterized the intimate relationship between father and son as unbreakable. He began to doubt everything after the loss, including his role in the band. He acknowledged that he had seriously considered leaving the music industry entirely, and that he no longer wanted to be a member of Led Zeppelin. He also made the decision to sober up and return his attention to his family on the day of the catastrophe. His grief was exacerbated by the fact that Carrick's funeral was attended solely by John Bonham. Robert started to wonder if there was more to the divide between him and Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones than just geography or culture. Nevertheless, he finally ascribed it to their disparate childhoods. He and Bonham were from the Midlands, whilst Jones and Page were from the South. During this time, Robert also decided to stop using cocaine, which he acknowledged had ruined his body and mind. He acknowledged that it had warped his character, turning him into a possessive and neurotic person. It was like taking back control of his life when he walked away from it. At his lowest, he even contemplated giving up music entirely in order to pursue a career in teaching, which he believed would be far more grounded and honest than the craziness of rock success. However, his fellow musicians weren't prepared to let him leave. His best friend, John Bonham, was there for him during his darkest hours, providing the solace and devotion Robert sorely needed during his grief. Meanwhile, Jimmy Page emphasized that Zeppelin wouldn't be the same without him, and reminded him of the connection they had as a band. Page urged him to return when he was ready, but to take as much time as he needed. In the end, Robert Plant rejoined the group. But by the spring of 1978, Led Zeppelin was starting to show signs of weakness. Tragic events occurred 13 months later. Bonham was admitted to the hospital after collapsing after a concert in 1980. The media suspected substance usage, but the band dismissed it as feasting before a play. Just before a planned rehearsal on September 24th of that year, Bonham's drinking got the better of him. He apparently drank over a quart of vodka during the lengthy night before passing out. He choked on his own vomit and was discovered dead the following day. It was a disastrous loss. Led Zeppelin declared in a succinct statement 2 months later that they could not go on without him. The loss was as much a personal as a professional one for Robert Plant. He had grown up alongside Bonham, learning the ins and outs of music and life together. In retrospect, Plant characterized their relationship as youthful, boisterous, self-assured, and frequently incorrect, yet always together. For Plant, Bonham's passing signified the demise of Led Zeppelin. He told Rolling Stone, "The band was dead the minute Bonzo left. Bonham had been his best buddy, not just a bandmate." Following the loss of a loved one, Plant needed a new beginning. He explained that removing the gimmicks of fame felt necessary while traveling, but music called him back, and assistance came from an unexpected place. Phil Collins, who had always admired Bonham, encouraged Plant to pursue a solo career, which at the time was Collins's own hit in the air. Even though Tonight dominated the radio, he still found time to play drums on Plant's first solo album. In his podcast, Digging Deep, Plant recalled how Collins's infectious energy in the studio helped him establish himself as a solo artist. The two continued to collaborate on Plant's second album, The Principle of Moments, which came out in 1983, and Collins even accompanied him on a North American tour. In the early 1990s, Plant had a health scare that almost permanently silenced him. A London specialist told him his voice would be gone within 6 months, so damaged that he wouldn't even be able to speak. Plant would later describe Collins as a spirited, positive force that lifted him when he needed it most. Despite the scare, Plant released a number of additional records throughout the 1990s and beyond, demonstrating the tenacity that had defined his career from the start. Other singers, such as Steven Tyler and Elton John, had recovered from similar problems, and Plant refused to accept defeat. He underwent treatment and recovered, proving the dire predictions wrong. During a successful 2-hour performance in London in December 2007, Plant joined Paige Jones and Jason Bonham to honor Ahmet Ertegun of Atlantic Records. Fans were ecstatic, and offers for a full reunion tour, including one rumored to be worth $200 million, poured in. However, Plant declined, feeling that the band had ended on a high note and not wanting to jeopardize Zeppelin's legacy. Zeppelin had been a band built on 4 men, not 3. While fans continued to hope for more, Plant remained unmoved, dismissing the idea of a reunion tour as nothing more than wishful thinking, and even comparing it to becoming a bunch of bored old men following the Rolling Stones around. Jason Bonham remembered that after the show, he hugged Plant and asked about future concerts. Plant simply told him his father would have been proud. Page was frustrated by his resistance and publicly acknowledged that he was sick of waiting. Plant never faltered in the face of rumors, and in 2009 Prince Charles, now King Charles III, presented him with the honor of being named a Commander of the Order of the British Empire for his solo work. A year later he brought his old project, Band of Joy, back to life. This time with new members, the group flourished for a short while before Plant broke it up again in 2011. By 2012 he was ready for something new, and he formed a new group called the Sensational Spaceshifters, which made its debut in Gloucester that May. American singer Patty Griffin was part of the group's rotating lineup, and Plant disclosed that he and Griffin were in a romantic relationship during this time. After more than a year of dating, their relationship ended in 2014, and Plant returned to England. He later acknowledged that the breakup had affected him, and his album Carry Fire captured a lot of that emotional weight. Plant never stopped making music, and in 2018 he received the UK Americana Honors and Awards Lifetime Achievement Award. Beyond his music, Plant has remained closely involved with his community, helping to save the Bellin, a beloved music venue in Bath, in 2013 by contributing to a community purchase plan. A year later, he started another project, Saving Grace, a stripped-down acoustic group. The global pandemic disrupted their plans for a 2020 US tour, but the band became yet another chapter in Plant's long journey. Even though Robert Plant closed the book on Led Zeppelin long ago, his love of music and the impact he left on it are still as strong as ever. In 2020, he gave to a small clothing company in his hometown of Caminster that was producing scrubs for hospitals during the pandemic. His voice, style, and presence continue to inspire new generations of musicians.